Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Hello, everyone. My name is Maura McKeon. I'm the local campaigns manager here at the European Movement UK. Welcome to our webinar. Thank you very much for joining us. We're here today to talk about the brand new report that the European Movement UK is launching on the impact that Brexit's had on businesses across the UK. Since the referendum in 2016, and then since the start of the transition period in 2020, the UK's business community has raised concerns over the impact that Brexit has had on our commerce, our trade, our economy, and on individual businesses. A couple of years ago, armed with this knowledge, one of our local activist groups in Wandsworth and Merton used some of our internal funding to do a survey of their local small businesses, and they found a widespread dissatisfaction with the Brexit deal and its implementation. When we saw the results, even we were surprised, and we realised that there's a massively important story here that's not being told. Businesses across the UK need a safe, trustworthy place to share their experience, and we decided to provide it. So here at the European Movement UK, we surveyed over 1,700 businesses. We actually originally intended to survey 1,000, but we just got so much support and so many people coming through, we ended up getting nearly 800 more, and the vast majority of these have been small to medium-sized enterprises. So to understand how the UK's decision to leave the European Union has impacted them, we really needed to listen. Over the past 7 years, leading Brexit politicians have dismissed the concerns of business, but our impact report gives UK businesses the opportunity to tell their stories in their own words. And I'll share with you right now some of the headline figures that we found. So it's clear that Brexit is not working for UK businesses. A staggering 94% of respondents have said that Brexit has harmed their business. Brexit has created more red tape for our businesses, and it hasn't reduced it like we were promised. Over 53% of businesses have said that the volume and complexity of documentation has increased because of Brexit. Brexit-related labour shortages are crippling sectors of our economy. 643 businesses in sectors like engineering, hospitality, agriculture and finance have told the European movement that they've experienced staffing issues as a result of Brexit. And this doesn't just impact on business owners, it's affecting the livelihoods of hardworking British people. 2 in 3 businesses have said that they're not trading at pre-Brexit and pre-pandemic levels, and 1 in 4 have had to reduce their workforce as a result. When it comes to the single market and the customs union, there's clearly a widespread support among the business community. 95.5% of our respondents have said that they'd benefit from access to the single market, and 92% said the same thing for the customs union. 2/3 also believe that the UK will eventually end up restoring its former place in both the single market and the customs union. And of all of the statistics we were able to collect from this report, I think that's the most surprising and possibly the most telling. We have copies of our report on our website for any of you to view, with the full methodology, key findings, and also some deeply moving testimony from UK entrepreneurs. We're thrilled today to have some here to share their experience in person, but we need as many politicians and decision makers as possible to see this report and truly understand what's happening to hardworking business people across the UK as a result of Brexit. That's why we did our survey, it's why we published the report, and it's why today we're asking you all to share the report with your local MP. Don't worry, you don't have to download the report, write an email, find their address and attach it. We have a web tool that will do all of that for you. You just need your name, email address and postcode, and you can even edit the email before you send it if you want to. And the link for that should be beneath me right now on the banner, and it should also be in the chat if you'd like to start right now. I'll just run through some of the very exciting speakers who are sharing their time with us this evening. First of all, we have Barbara Callender, who is on our executive committee, but more importantly, she is the chair of the Wandsworth and Merton European Movement branch, and it was their original survey of local businesses that started all of this off. So she's going to talk a bit about her group, what they've done. Then we're thrilled to have Baroness Joyce Quin, who's here to offer a political perspective on the report. We'll then have a panel discussion with some of our business owners, and then we'll bring in some of your questions towards the end as well. So make sure to put them in the chat box as we go. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Barbara Callender.
So last night I was in the Houses of Parliament with my local European movement group, Wandsworth and Merton, at an event that highlighted the many challenges faced by local businesses because of Brexit. We were hosted by the local MP for Battersea, Maura de Cordova. The audience comprised several of our branch members, together with many local business leaders who spoke about the impact of leaving the EU on their companies. Now, we're fortunate to have a local MP who refuses to be complicit in the omerta surrounding Brexit, so prevalent in government circles. And I can tell you that the local business representatives who spoke last night echoed the problems that were highlighted in our 2021 report, and which also we've just heard a summary of from Maura. Let me give you some examples of the comments from last night. This from the founder and group CEO of Milk and Honey, a PR company. Quote, Brexit has made running a business much more complicated, time-consuming and costly. Now, her comments also highlight some of the wider effects beyond her industry. Brexit and the political and economic instability it spawned meant that business finance is far harder and more expensive to access. They've seen a marked increase in the number of clients who have scaled back, paused, or completely withdrawn from PR activity because the expected funding just hasn't materialized. It's led to a PR sector that is reporting failing clients, difficulties in being paid, and longer lead times to recruit new clients. This, in turn, has seen some notable PR agency failures from companies that, in normal circumstances, would be thriving. Now, before Brexit, these companies employed hundreds of people, contributed to tax revenues, and supported clients to grow their businesses, creating a virtuous circle. After Brexit, this is not happening nearly as much. Further, Brexit saw the UK turn its back on one of the world's richest talent pools. Today, recruiting from the EU has become a nightmare of bureaucracy. This company's last visa sponsorship, for example, demanded significant legal advice, days of additional admin, and cost around £6,000. And they've always been an outward-looking agency with people coming from the EU and many other countries. Well, Brexit has also damaged their diversity. They also note that Brexit and everything that followed has damaged our country's international reputation. Once respected for our considered counsel, respect for the rule of law and leadership, the UK is now seen as chaotic, unreliable, and rudderless. These are new and unwelcome national associations that contaminate business reputations too. So they now have to spend time PRing this country. In average terms, they estimate Brexit has taken about a 25% bite from their UK profit and loss. Now let's look at the hospitality industry. The general manager of the Pestana Hotel in Battersea informed us his company is suffering on all fronts. When COVID struck, many of the people who worked in his industry came from the EU, and they went back to their home countries during lockdown. By the time restrictions were lifted, the UK had left the EU, and many who might have wished to return here to work were unable to. And for his company, the sponsorship costs associated with employing kitchen staff, etc., from outside the UK render it financially unfeasible. He makes the point that there's only one level of English language proficiency required for visa requirements. But is it appropriate to apply this to hotel porters and scientists alike? His fresh produce costs are up. And he pointed out, how can you offer a hotel breakfast if your egg supply isn't guaranteed? His energy costs have risen by 300%, as opposed to their sister companies in the Netherlands, who only report a 200% increase. Finally, we heard from Black Book Winery. They're a husband and wife team who supply specialist wines. Their founder highlighted problems with supply chains, labour, and seasonal demand. And as well as the increased costs of glass, corks, and the grapes themselves, they're constantly battling with logistics, delays, and post-Brexit red tape. Maura de Cordova is committed to working with us on future projects and supporting our activities. One of our speakers called Brexit the Voldemort of British politics. We have to turn this round. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Barbara. very interesting. I'm going to bring Baroness Quin in now. Joyce, would you like to come in and give us the political perspective on the issue?
Thank you very much. I'm hoping you can hear me all right. Yep, good. Thank you very much for inviting me to say a few words at this event. And I'd certainly like to begin by welcoming the report and congratulate those who've been involved in putting it together. Reading it and listening to both Maura and Barbara, it certainly chimes in completely with my own contacts with business in my own area of the northeast of England. Today, because I knew I was speaking at this event, I spoke to representatives of 3 businesses that I've had a lot of contact with ever since Brexit. One, Barbara mentioned a winery. This first one that I would mention is a producer of craft specialty beer. And as again with many small businesses, the consignments were often quite small in volume. And because of that, they can't benefit from economies of scale, and they're very much affected by the extra paperwork and also the extra charges, which often mean that actually the charges are even more expensive than the cost of the product. Another industry that I've had a lot of contact with is the fishing industry, and the contact I spoke with today was someone who voted enthusiastically for Brexit and has now completely changed his mind as a result of the extra hurdles in exporting prawns from the local fishing port here in North Shields to France and Spain, and the difficulty that has caused, particularly with delays and red tape, which mean that a product which only has a shelf life of 5 days isn't exported as quickly as it used to be, and that of course is absolutely crucial. And my third contact was with someone from the antique and vintage trade who used to do a lot of business with France and the Netherlands. Obviously, a business like that has so many articles and items, and apparently all these different antique and vintage items have different levels of duty. There's an incredible amount of paperwork, and indeed many businesses like that have just simply stopped trading with the EU altogether. There are many more examples, but to try and give a political perspective, I think we probably all remember when Boris Johnson announced his deal on Christmas Eve in 2020. And one of the things he said, which is absolutely astonishing in retrospect, is that he said there would be no new non-tariff barriers to trade. Well, that has to be a gigantic lie. And unfortunately, businesses and our economy are paying a great price as a result. It's very sad, because prior to Brexit, Britain was making a huge success of the single market, and British business was influential in making the rules, not having rules imposed on us, as so often is alleged. In terms of the politics of all this, I think that this is an interesting thing for us to explore. It's been pointed out that the parties as a whole don't like to talk about Brexit, don't want to go over all old arguments, don't want to antagonize their voters. But actually, it seems to me that they're missing a huge trick, that public opinion has shifted, and that there is a powerful patriotic case to make that the Brexit deal is not good for Britain, and Brexit is not in our country's interests. It was interesting today, I was watching the autumn statement, as I expect many of us were on the call, and there was no mention about the burdens of red tape and the obstacles to trade, even though we know it's such a big preoccupation, particularly of small businesses. Well, I think the report that we have in front of us is right to raise this, and I think in the European movement we have to think how we're going to take this forward. We're in a pre-election period, and therefore contact with MPs and candidates is absolutely crucial. And I was so pleased that Barbara's work had been immediately brought to the attention of her local MP, and the local MP is engaging with that. In a way, we've got to try and do this all over the country, perhaps particularly in marginal seats as we approach the election. I think we need to press for cutting red tape, cutting duty, pressing for visa-free access for musicians and those in the creative industries, for example. There are many things that we should put forward. And obviously, talk about the importance of the single market and try to pave the way forward for rejoining the customs union and the single market. I think the report shows us both those immediate steps to take and also the longer term goals that we should strive for. As far as the general public is concerned, I think there has been a shift, and we need to build on this to create an overwhelming awareness that it was madness to cut ourselves adrift from our nearest and biggest market and from our EU friends and neighbours, where we can achieve so much by trading, working and cooperating together.
Thank you so much, Joyce. It's been really eye-opening to hear again about the red tape in action, and also how we can make a patriotic case for a closer relationship with Europe in these important ways. So we're now on that theme. We are now going to turn to our business owners who've been a part of our report and a part of our information collecting over the past few months, and we are thrilled today to have Hugh Marcus from Blackthorn Farm in County Antrim, James Wilson of Deep Dock Limited, which is a fishing and aquaculture company in Anglesey, Nigel Craddock from NCDNA Architecture in Kingston, and Daniel Lambert from Daniel Lambert Wines Limited in Bryn Menyn. So we've got a great selection of different parts of the country and also of different industries to talk about today. Would each of you like to go around and just say a little bit about your business and just introduce yourselves? We'll start with Hugh.
Oops.
I don't think we can hear you.
No.
Okay, well, Hugh's, I think he might be having some technical difficulties. So James, would you like to go?
Yeah, sure. Hi, good evening, everyone. Yeah, James Wilson. I'm a mussel cultivator, essentially from North Wales. We used to work in Northern Ireland as well. So we've been impacted through Brexit in three ways. Principally because our major market was the European Union, and since we've left the single market, the way that the regulatory framework applies to us has completely altered. In a way, it sort of segs into one of the other hot topics which people may have been aware of, or maybe aware of, in respect of like water quality and the amount of increased amount of sewage that goes into the water around the coastline of the UK. So our exports now are required to only come from the exceptionally best water, and we don't often find that to be the case. So we have, since the end of the transition period, had a 98% reduction in our sales, and that's resulted in 20 people losing their jobs in the Menai sector already. We're sort of clinging on by the skin of our fingers at the moment, but our future is at the very best outside the single market, one of sort of ongoing uncertainty, and that's about it for me.
Thank you very much. I don't know, Hugh, are you able to talk now? You seem to be back.
Hi, I'm Hugh Marcus, and I have a small livestock farm on the hills of County
Oh, Hugh, I think we're still having some issues with your connection.
Ah, okay. Can you
So I think if we give it
hear
another
me?
minute, it's going in and out, so it's improved. But I think if we give it another minute, then I can just bring Nigel in, and then I'll bring you in at the end. Nigel, would you like to just say a bit about your business?
Right. Can you hear me? Hello, good evening. Thank you for inviting me. First thing, it's fantastic. So I, in my previous life, I was a director of a very large practice working exclusively universities and research and science, partly for governments as well. And about a year and a half ago, I set my own business up, primarily because I wanted to do smaller work and environmental work. But I have kept on as a consultant to some universities. My first commission was for a housing development. And at that time, 2018, everything was viable, even though inflationary costs were very high because of material supplies and labour shortages as a result of leaving Europe. Truss's mini budget in a day crashed that project. So the business plan of the developer just couldn't make it work commercially. Now, this was a net zero housing development replacing a 1970s highly inefficient and polluting development. So Brexit, in my world of architecture, isn't just limiting the scope of work, but it's also not progressing the green agendas that we should be progressing. Just as a few statistics I want to roll off, and these are from the UK Trade and Business Commission, which exclusively focuses on building and architectural issues. Labour skills, we're about 350,000 people short in the building industry. Materials, a 60% inflation after leaving the EU. And 60% of our construction materials come from the EU. Strangely, it hasn't declined, it's increased slightly. And the reason for that, as Baroness Quin pointed out, is the geography of business. Business works when it's geographically not too distant. Some of it, a politician, of course, attributes all of this now to COVID and the Ukrainian war. And to a degree, they're right. But if you compare our position with, say, Denmark, which has 35% materials inflation, Netherlands has 14%. So the UK tops the chart on high inflation for building, high labour skills shortages, which increases inflation, and the finger can be clearly pointed at leaving the single market and the customs union. There's no question about that. The other thing I'd like to say is in my previous life as working exclusively on science, the Horizon project, which is a 95 billion euro fund for advanced integrated scientific research, we left, or we were wobbling about whether to leave or whether to stay. That took 6 years from the 2016 election on the EU, and sorry, the referendum. And the UK just couldn't compete with that. No way. It's also affected the science, this integration of Europe and science. And we've missed out on 6 years of that. So laboratories have ceased investing. The AstraZeneca moved their pharmaceutical plant to Ireland recently, to Dublin. They cited green issues, the green agenda, and taxation. But they also stated, and below the line, because of distribution throughout the European Union. My work at Trinity College Dublin, where I was working before I set up, UCD in Dublin, Cork and Limerick universities, heavily investing in science research. And that will draw away, I believe, advanced science research from the UK, unless we join the customs union and the single market. At the moment, the US is using the Republic, God bless the Republic, but they're using the Republic as the conduit to the rest of Europe. Previously, in science research, it was the UK. So I could go on for blooming hours about it, but I'm going to stop now. Thank you.
Thank you for mentioning the Horizon programme as well, because people often don't quite understand the link between all the research and development and the funding that comes with it, and then the economic benefit that we have from having that intellectual property. Okay, we're going to try.
Can I just mention one thing on that? Because the Horizon project used to recruit great postgraduates and great doctoral students from around Europe. The best brains in Europe would tend to focus at Imperial College, Cambridge, Oxford, Durham, Sussex Uni, all the great unis with science research. Now, if you want to do a postgraduate degree, you pay 16 grand from Europe. Previously, it was UK fees. So we've lost on that. Sorry, that's all I'm going to say tonight on that.
Well, thank you very much, Nigel. I'll bring in Hugh, third time lucky, and then I'll bring in Daniel. Hugh, let's see if we can hear you this time.
Okay, any better success this time? Yeah, you can hear. Okay. So fine. I'm Hugh. Yeah, good. I'm Hugh, and I'm a small livestock farmer on the hills of County Antrim in Northern Ireland. I guess for me, life is slightly more positive than for the rest of our contributors tonight. And I have to say, my heart really sinks when I listen to my fellow business people and the challenges that you've had and the difficulties that you've had. In Northern Ireland, we have a thing called the Northern Ireland Protocol, and then it was latterly replaced by something called the Windsor Framework. And thankfully for us, that has mitigated the worst excesses of Brexit. It was billed as a political thing, but in reality, it's about food. Because lots of people won't know Northern Ireland is a relatively small region with just 1.9 million people. But we produce enough food for 10 million. And the whole island of Ireland, with under 6 million people, produces enough food for 35 million. In reality, a lot of that food goes across to mainland UK. So, for instance, 81% of the UK's dairy exports is actually milk crossing the Irish border for processing between farm and milk plant. Those typically are the sorts of things that we've enjoyed since the days of the single market, and we still have access to that single market. And it means that our businesses aren't as disadvantaged as the rest of the UK. There have been challenges, but thankfully not anywhere near as much. And I'm happy to take further questions on how life is here later on.
Thank you very much, Hugh. Always great to get the perspective from inside the single market still. And Daniel, last but by no means least, would you like to tell us a bit about your business?
I'm Daniel Lambert Wines. The business is based in South Wales between Swansea and Cardiff in Bridgend or Bremennin. But I'm actually based here in the south of France now, so I'm actually in the EU. Aren't I lucky? Anyway, basically, since Brexit started, the wine industry has been at the forefront of all of the problems because of the fact it's a licensed good. Many people aren't aware of the fact that the transition zones that were, or the transition periods that were put in, were not actually applied to alcohol because of the fact it's an excise good. And because it's excise goods, it had all of the protocols slapped on it straight away, straight after the announcement on the 1st of January in 2020, after the Brexit deal was agreed, just 6 to 7 days earlier. So you can appreciate that we've had an interesting journey over the last few years. I remember thinking to myself after the Brexit referendum that we needed to prepare, and we needed to prepare quite a lot, because I knew at that point that it was going to be tricky. So I took the foresight to basically set myself up with a full bonded warehouse back in 2019, before the actual Brexit came in, and be registered for all of the various things. Now, I wanted to take over because a lot of people don't understand what's actually happened with Brexit and alcohol and logistics and supply chains and all this good stuff. We hear sound bites from all of these, and I think it's important to go through all the protocols, as I've done with many other talks that I've done on this, as to why it's so difficult and what's actually changed. It's one thing saying it's changed, it's really hard, fine, but why is it so hard? That's probably more of an important question. The reasons are quite incredible, and how the government doesn't understand what it's done is even more incredible, and I've been quite vocal about that. So to give you an example, in the Single Market and Customs Union, to import wine from Europe, there used to be literally one document. That was it. That's all you needed, one document to ship a pallet of wine from anywhere in the EU 28, and it could move anywhere between the EU 28, and all you had to do was click a button, say you'd received it, end of the story. That's how simple it was. Then Brexit came along, and we had to get involved with the chief, and then later CDS and EMCS, and have a bonded warehouse. But we also still needed EMCS. Now, these are acronyms, but these are actual computer systems that now run the system. Now, people talk about paperwork. The paperwork that we deal with is so vast that we now have a full-time employee who sits in their office all day, literally processing documents, day in, day out, 39 hours a week. That's all they do, looking at paperwork to try and maintain the status quo on what we were doing previously. Previously to Brexit, it took 5 minutes to clear a pallet of wine. Now it takes about 2 hours. And we ship quite a lot of wine. We're supplying some of the national retailers, some of the blue chips, 300 independents around the UK, as well as wholesalers. So the chances are that many of your viewers this evening will be drinking something that we supply to the UK market. There's a possibility. That all being said and done, why is it so challenging? It's so challenging because the government hasn't really understood what Brexit meant. I've always had the view that each of the systems has changed systematically and radically as we've gone along this journey, probably because they didn't actually understand what they were getting into in the first place. And so to go from a system whereby you have one documentation to a system whereby you now have 14 different documents to actually clear wine down fully, to put it into free circulation, you have to understand that that is incredibly time consuming. Moreover, to say that chief or CDS or EMCS is easy to understand it's another level of bureaucracy that it takes highly trained people to understand how to even use the system. And moreover, the system itself continually breaks down because the programmers of the system don't know how to make it work for what it's now being used for. Let me touch on that. Chief was the old system that the UK invented in 1982. I kid you not. On Brexit, the eve of Brexit and into Brexit, we were using a computer system for all of our importation on absolutely every single commodity that came into the UK, and it was built in 1982. And we're meant to be in the G8. I find it quite entertaining. The government understood in 2010, pre-referendum, that it needed to update that system. And so they were going to introduce something called CDS. Customs Declaration System is what it actually stands for. And the Customs Declaration System, they realized that, they were in the EU, they didn't need to make it too difficult. And so the system was created. And then, of course, Brexit happened. That was supposed to be launched in 2017. It got put back and put back and put back. It's actually launched only for imports because they know that it's a complete road crash to launch it for exports. And the system itself, wow, that's properly complicated. It's taken us several months pre-launch to actually understand how to use the thing. But we use it, and we are now using it successfully on imports. It is actually better than Chief, but it's incredibly complicated. For exports, we're still on Chief. We're still on a system from 1982 in 2023. I mean, you know, that's quite something, really. That tells you how far the UK has come with Brexit. Then, of course, we have all the problems of the cartels that are set up. Now, of course, the government seems to not want to regulate this at all, but there are very few people that have access to the systems of CDS, the badges that you require to get through the ports, etc., etc. So a lot of people don't want to spend the time like we have to do as a bonded warehouse keeper and employ brokers to do the importation for them. Those brokers are having an absolute field day. They are having a bonanza because a pallet of wine used to cost pre-Brexit around about 180 quid from pretty much anywhere in Europe. You could ship one pallet. And one of the earlier speakers touched on this. Today, to ship a pallet of wine, you're looking at around about 300 to 320 pounds for the actual shipment, the logistics side of it. But for the actual cost of paperwork, you're looking at another 180 to 200 quid for the paperwork if you can't do it yourself. So you've gone from 180 to over 500 quid to ship one pallet. So that's a twofold increase. That's a 200% increase just on moving something before you even think about the cost of the commodity. It's of the thing you're actually shipping. So this is why SMEs, medium and small sized businesses, are having such a tough time with import. The multinationals, of course, are having a bonanza as well because they always ship by multiple containers, and so therefore it's not affecting them. So you have to beg the question there. The brokers, they're not regulated. They can do what they like, and they are, and they have a cartel. There's a cartel of them because most European hauliers now will not come to the UK for the simple reason they can't be bothered. They've got 27 other countries they can service without any problems at all. And this is the perspective you see when you live in France, like I now do, that Brexit and the British, with their Brexit ideas, the rest of Europe has sort of said, do you know what? Fine, you have your Brexit. We'll go off in this direction. We'll continue without you. It's not a problem. That's why it's so crucial for the UK to get back into Europe as quickly as possible, because we used to actually influence the decisions and now we don't. And because we don't, we're being left behind. I haven't even touched on exports. Exports to Europe are down dramatically despite all the hype, because most British businesses have realised it's too difficult, it's too complicated. Even us, with all of the commodity codes, with all of the training, with all of the software, with all of the badges, with all the infrastructure to actually do it, we used to be able to ship to Germany and to Belgium and to France a pallet of wine from New World countries like Australia, America, etc. inside a week. Was no problem. Now, on average, it takes about 3.5 to 4 months, because people don't understand all the paperwork that's required. And the reason that all of this issue is happening is because everything has a supply chain. People think that the Brexit problem is only a UK problem. It's not. A supply chain starts all the way at the beginning of the supply chain, and the supply chain actually starts where the wine, in my case, is produced. And that's global. It can be anywhere in the world. But in the EU, our producers, they're having to register for new systems to be able to export to the UK. And a lot of them saying, well, do you know what? You can pay for that. Just this evening, I had a conversation with one of our key suppliers, and they said to me, I'm really sorry, Daniel, but the labelling of importer details on the bottle, it's going to cost you around about 8 cents a bottle. And we can't afford to we're not going to pay for it. So we're charging you plus the time incurred, etc., etc. So we're actually going to increase all of our production to you by 20 cents on a bottle. Doesn't sound like a lot. By the time you put that through to retail, it works out 50p by the time everyone's applied their margin. So that's another increase. That's another deliberate barrier to trade. It's another increase on a bottle of wine. And this is something that's happening across the entire industry. These are the barriers to trade that are being put in because of a very shoddy deal, and the sooner it's reversed, the better. And there you go.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I think many of my friends would find it chilling to hear that it costs 3 times more to ship wine into the UK now. That will definitely stay with some of my friends. We've had a few questions, and I'll take them now. The first question is around the sampling that we did for the report and how we got people to engage with us and whether or not it was a self-selecting group of people. The answer is that no. As far as we're concerned, we shared with our list, but we went much further and did everything we could to get the widest possible spread of people in terms of their politics, and to really try and push out beyond the pro-EU bubble that so often we can get ourselves trapped in. And so we did targeted ads on social media. We even did ads on LinkedIn. We had members of our local groups across the country going out directly into their local businesses, armed with business cards with a link to the survey on it that you could just scan as a QR code. So we went above and beyond to try and get the largest possible selection of people so that we could get the widest possible set of views. And there were a handful of people who did say that Brexit hadn't made things more difficult for them, but you can see from the data that we've shared with you already that the vast majority of businesses did have something to say about the negative impact that Brexit's had on them and their ability to do business. And what we found, as you can see this evening, is that so many businesses are just quite sick of sitting in silence on it, and they really want to share their experiences. So we've got a few more questions coming as well. I think we've got a question for David from
Yes.
East Kent for Europe. So that's, have you directly spoken to or influenced the politicians? And how can you reach as many politicians as possible? And will they listen to you? David, I'll bring you in quickly. And I think I'll bring Joyce and Barbara in on that one as well.
I guess it's not David, it's Daniel, right? But anyway, no drama. Have I spoken to politicians? Yes. I mean, I've had quite a lot of fun with politicians. If you watch my Twitter, which is Daniel Lambert 29, if you have a look on there, it's been quite interesting over the last 2 years. I didn't realise that putting out a thread back in January 2021, 16 days into Brexit, would end up in 16.5 million hits, but it did. And here I am today. Fine, whatever. I've spoken to a lot of politicians. I spoke to Chris Elmore, who is the local MP for Ogmore, where my business is based, and he understood exactly what I was saying. He's very, very pro-European, a Labour Party member, obviously. But, of course, I actually used to live in Bridgend, and in Bridgend, we have the wonderful cross-dressing Jamie Wallace, who was less keen to have a conversation with me even. So I've also had, quite interestingly, Michael Gove stand up in Parliament 3 times, in fact, and say that he was going to give me a call to discuss my problems. I'm still waiting for the call, let's just say that. And I'm not really expecting it anytime soon. Have I influenced people? It's interesting in the budget today that the government, after a number of threats from a number of key people in the wine industry, they backtracked on their increase on duty levels being increased again today because they realised that their record-breaking 50-year increase on duty that they did in August to increase it again might just be taking the mick. Just might be doing that. So the answer to the question is yes, we have influenced politicians. I have influenced politicians, and yes, I was responsible for them not introducing VI1s into the UK, which would have made importation even more difficult than it already is.
Thank you, Daniel. I'll bring in Joyce, then Barbara. Joyce, would you like to talk a bit about politicians and Brexit?
Well, I'm just looking at the question about how to get in touch with politicians and influence them. I mean, obviously, politicians are emailable. They have constituency offices on the whole, and most of them anyway, and they also have staff in Westminster. And as I try to mention, we are in a very much a pre-election period, and this is a good opportunity to contact politicians, because they'll be very keen to show that they're alive to constituents' concerns in the run-up to a general election. That might sound a bit cynical, but it's certainly true. And certainly they will not want letters to newspapers saying, I wrote to my MP and never got a reply. I wrote to my MP and they showed no interest in the difficulties that I'm facing, and so on. So I think there are obviously very obvious ways of contacting politicians. And in a pre-election period, it's perhaps more important than ever to do that.
Thank you, Joyce. And one great way to email your politicians is to click on the link on the banner beneath us and to send a copy of the report directly to your local MP through our website, and to share that with all the people you know who might be interested as well. You can see it beneath us right now, and just to do that as many times as possible. Barbara, would you like to talk a bit about your engagement, because you've just been in Parliament?
Well, look, we're in southwest London. We are fortunate because we are in an area that predominantly, the vast majority of people in the referendum voted Remain. They understood the value of being a member state of the EU, and they didn't want to lose it. But nevertheless, our branch covers 5 MPs, and we reach out to all of them. We invite them, to be guest speakers at events we have. We keep the dialogue going so that they know that we are here. We're not going away. And in fact, and as Joyce just so actually eloquently said, now is the time to ramp all this up. So we're going to be doing more with it as much as possible. I mean, Marsha last night, and in the thank you email she sent us, she said, I want to stay involved. I want to take as much of this forward. And we will certainly be working with her on that. But I think Joyce's point about contacting papers, making a noise about how much your MP has actually responded to your genuine concerns. I think the more small businesses lobbying their MPs and going, look at the mess we're in, thanks to Brexit, the better. I think that's enough.
Thanks, Barbara. We're running out of time. We've only got about 9 minutes left. But I'm going to ask a question of Hugh, James and Nigel. And we had a big shock, actually, at the European movement when we saw the answer to the question of whether or not businesses thought we would end up rejoining the single market and the customs union. So my question to you three is whether you do believe that we will inevitably end up back there or not, and why. So if you can keep it to 2 minutes, that would be great. So I'm going to start off with Nigel.
I think it's inevitable in my sector because of the supply of materials. If I go back to science again, Hunt today said he put 5 million quid to Imperial College Health and Imperial College to do research on health issues. 5 million quid is about the cost of 2 German-made Bruker NMR machines. And now, because of the red tape, 5 million quid you'll get 2 of those. So that's equipment. That's not building. It's not staff. It's not. In other words, 5 million quid, absolutely useless. Again, I'll go back to the Horizon thing. But the thing I think, just very quickly, I think the social contract between the people and our governance has been broken. And I think until we get truth, honesty in our democratic leaders, we haven't got a chance. Brexit was a lie, and it's coming out to be proven a lie. Today, but I knew we were sitting in tonight, and today I was genuinely trying to find a Brexit benefit for my sector. Genuinely trying to find one. There isn't. Honestly, there isn't any. There isn't one. And joining the single market, joining the customs union, it's inevitable. And finally, my kids and their peer groups from all different social backgrounds, they see themselves as European, all of them, every single one of them. And I think it's a question of time. It might be 5 years, it might be 10 years, but we will be back there because there's a new generation that are European. And I think that's all I've got to say on it, really.
Thank you, Nigel. I'll bring in Hugh, then James. Hugh?
After Brexit occurred, that my grandchildren would probably rejoin the EU from an impoverished UK. But my sense is, and it's merely my sense, that there is a momentum beginning to gather for people to support the UK drawing closer to the EU. And I mean, the reality is, if we begin to try and realign on trade, we will inevitably try to realign on other things like the freedom of movement and lots of other stuff. And my hope is that we will find ourselves sooner than that back in the EU. I'd love to see it in my lifetime.
Thank you very much, Hugh. I'm going to bring James in for the final question. So do you think we're going to rejoin the Single Market and Customs Union? And also a specific question for you, James. Are you saying that the business has declined due to worse water quality now as a result of the UK no longer following EU water standards?
The last one first, I guess. A bit, for sure, because we used to have to adhere to the Water Framework Directive obligations, and we don't really abide by them anymore. But to be honest, we were always the dirty man of Europe. We were before the single market came in, and I think since privatisation of the water utility companies, we've maintained that. The problem for us is that we were hit at both ends before. We had gold-plated application of the regulatory framework, and then we had a government that only sought to do the minimum in terms of controlling the amount of sewage and bacteriological pollution that went into waterways, and that's just got worse. So as a third country, we have to the rules apply differently, and so that's why we find ourselves in the situation that we do. In terms of will we go back in single? Yeah, absolutely. I think there's for lots of different reasons. There's no other way. It's like how it's going to happen, and I think Hugh's right. I think it will be a gradual process first of all, but change occurs often quite slowly and then very quickly. I think that's it has to happen because the reason why it's not happening is merely face saving from the other side at the moment. I think that will be overcome over time. One thing that no one's talked about today, which I'm quite surprised about actually, is the impact of Brexit on I suppose the four-nation status of Great Britain. You know, I think it's well accepted now that Northern Ireland will probably at some point soon become part of United Ireland. The independence movement in Wales has been turbo boosted by Brexit, and Scotland strongly maintains its European slant. And so I think the question for the politicians, really, as much as anything else in Westminster particularly, is if they want to keep the United Kingdom intact strategically for them, they need to be making moves to thaw the relationship between Europe, because it's the thing that's driving a lot of this need. Certainly in Wales, I don't know if Daniel agrees with that, but that's my that's the way it feels to me anyway. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. We've got one final question and we'll end on this one. It's a bit of a thorny one, and I'm going to give this to Joyce as former Europe Minister. Rejoining the Single Market and Customs Union may seem likely, but would the EU have us back as a member state?
Obviously, a lot would depend on the attitude of the EU members to us. I think they would just have to be convinced of our goodwill, and that a lot of that would depend on what the government was at the time and how it was presenting its case. I think what we have to remember at every stage that, and I was thinking about this when the previous speaker was talking about this strain on the Union of the UK because of all of Brexit. We have to remember that overall the Brexit result was very narrow. Sometimes it's those who were on the winning side of the argument like to claim that it was an overwhelming victory, but of course it wasn't. It was under 4% of those who voted. That was the margin. For such a huge decision to be made on that basis was really dreadful. And although it is true that obviously I live near the border with Scotland, so I'm very, very aware of this, it is true that Scotland voted strongly for to remain. So did various parts of England, particularly London, where there was a huge Remain vote overall, very similar to that in Scotland, and also a lot of our major cities, Bristol, Manchester, Liverpool, Newcastle, all voted Remain, and I think that we should. Well, those of us who are keen to keep the UK together should stress just how much support there was in the UK for maintaining our relationship in the EU, despite all those lies that were told during the referendum campaign. I'd like to be optimistic about whether we rejoin the single market and eventually rejoin the EU. I think there's a reasonable chance that we will, but I can't see it quite as inevitable simply because nothing ever seems to be inevitable in politics.
Thank you very much, Joyce. And on that note, we will end our webinar, but remember to click on the link below and send this report to your MP. Get everyone you know to do it. The more we can reach, the better. So again, it's the link beneath us. So I just want to say a final thank you to everyone who joined us tonight, all of our panelists, to Michael and Piers who've been behind the scenes running the tech, and Michael who's done a lot of work to get everything organised for tonight. It's been a huge amount of effort on his part, and also to absolutely everyone who took part in our survey and in the report, and to all of the people in the audience tonight who've been making such insightful comments, who've come from Scotland all the way down to Dorset and everywhere in between. So thank you all. Share that link, share that report, and we'll see you next time.